The whispers on the hospital bed. They didn't shout. They didn't cry. They didn't grab the doctor's coat. They simply whispered. In a white room, surrounded by the hum of heart monitors and the dull flicker of fluorescent lights. Some whispered while hooked up to a morphine drip. Others didn't have the strength to speak, only scribbled a few shaky final words. And the things they whispered weren't about money. Not I wish I had bought a better car, not I wish I had made it to CEO, but instead, I wish I had. This story began one quiet Wednesday afternoon in a small hospital somewhere in Iowa. A nurse named Mariah was checking the IV line of an 84-year-old woman in the final stages of pancreatic cancer. The old woman held Mariah's hand tightly. No panic, no tears. She just looked into her eyes and whispered 4 words. I wish I had. And then stopped. There was no ending to the sentence. Because just a few minutes later, her eyes gently closed for the very last time. You know something? In over 20 years as a hospice nurse, Mariah had heard hundreds of whispers like that. And she came to one heartbreaking realization: most elderly people aren't afraid of dying. They're afraid of dying with something important left unlived. You're not watching this video out of curiosity. You're here because there's a whisper inside you too. Something you've never dared to do, never dared to say. Something you keep telling yourself you'll get to once things settle down. Once you retire. Once the kids grow up. Once life isn't so busy. Once everything feels calm. But you know the truth. That day of perfect calm, it never really comes. This video isn't meant to make you sad. It was created so that you won't have to whisper your regrets one day. So that you can live fully, love deeply, let go honestly, and one day, leave this world in peace knowing you truly lived. So now join me as we walk through 15 of the deepest regrets ever whispered. Whispers from people who once were your neighbor, your grandmother, your father, your childhood teacher. And together, let's learn how to live a life that doesn't leave anything unsaid when that final moment comes. I wish I had lived my own life. I was a good man, a good husband, a good employee, a good citizen, but I was never me. Final words of Harold Morris, 78, from Ohio. Harold Morris lived his whole life in a small riverside town in Ohio. A red brick house with a neatly trimmed lawn. Walls lined with award certificates and family portraits. From the outside, it looked like a perfect life, but behind every carefully framed photo was a rough draft that never got finished. When Harold was 13, he had a different dream. One afternoon, he skipped school and sat for hours in an old music shop on the corner. He didn't eat lunch, didn't buy a thing. He just stood there frozen, staring at a vintage Gibson guitar hanging on the wall. His fingers trembled as he strummed a few notes, and for the first time in his life, he felt his heart beat for real. That night, his eyes sparkled with something new. He came home and told his parents, "I want to learn guitar. I want to write music. I want to be a musician." His father, a steel mill worker, didn't even look up from his newspaper. He just said, "You need a real job, no time for foolish dreams." After that, the guitar became something never mentioned again in that house. So Harold studied accounting. He worked at the same bank for 35 years, woke up on time, drove to work, paid bills on schedule, took 1 week of vacation every year. He was the man everyone could count on. But inside was a soul that never got to breathe. At the end of his life, Harold finally admitted, "I lived a life someone else wrote for me." I was afraid to change, afraid of being laughed at, afraid I wouldn't make enough, afraid I'd fail. And in that fear, I buried myself. His voice cracked. He didn't regret the life he lived, he just mourned, the one he never dared to. His nurse asked him once, "If you could live again, what would you do differently?" He didn't answer right away, he just stared out the window for a long time. Then whispered, "I'd live as me, even if just for a year." The lesson: you can be a good person, a respected citizen, a loving parent, a stable provider. But if you never live true to yourself, you'll die with a quiet ache no one sees. What to do today? Write down 3 things you once dreamed of doing but never dared to. Ask yourself, what's stopping me? Pick one small thing and take the first step within the next 24 hours. Because if you don't start living your truth now, there may come a day when you whisper just like Harold, "I wish I had lived as myself." Have you ever given up on something you loved just because others told you it wasn't the right way to live? Share that story in the comments. It might just give someone else the courage to live their truth. I wish I had said I love you more often. I never once said I love you, son. And now he can't hear it anymore. Confession of Evelyn, 81. Evelyn was a composed woman. For 50 years, she lived by the quiet rhythms of a traditional American mother, cooking, cleaning, raising her children. No complaints, no dramatic tears, no lingering hugs. Her family grew up in a tidy home with warm dinners and well-made beds, but almost no surprise embraces. And rarely, if ever, those 3 little words, just said for no reason at all. Her son Daniel was the kind of boy who asked, "Mom, do you love me?" And Evelyn would reply, "I feed you, don't I, always with the love stuff. You're too old to be this clingy." Over time, Daniel stopped asking. By 16, he no longer reached for her at bedtime, stopped checking in after school, stopped looking back. When Daniel turned 24, he moved out of state. He wrote sometimes, called less and less. Evelyn thought, "He's grown, he's busy. All boys are like that." She didn't blame him, didn't call him either. She just waited for a birthday call, a quick check-in, one more of those spontaneous hugs she never used to return. But Daniel didn't call. 8 years later, Evelyn got the news Daniel had died in a car accident. She didn't cry at first, didn't scream, she just held the phone, the one she could have used all those years. And the first words out of her mouth weren't "why." They were, "I wish I had told him I loved him more." At the funeral, she stood before his photo and whispered, "I love you. I've always loved you. I just didn't know how to say it. No one ever taught me. I thought that caring was enough, but now I know. Love left unspoken is like a seed never watered. It dies." The lesson. We often think that love felt is enough, but love that isn't spoken, that isn't shown, is just another kind of loss. People don't know you love them unless you say it. And sometimes that one sentence is the only thing keeping someone going. What to do today? Call someone you haven't said "I love you" to in a while. Don't wait for a reason. Don't wait for the right time. Don't let those words become your goodbye. Love isn't measured by the years you lived together, but by how many times you had the courage to say "I love you." Have you ever regretted not saying "I love you" before it was too late? Share it in the comments below. You might give someone else the strength to finally say what they've been holding in for far too long. I wish I had let go sooner. I held on to my anger for 40 years, and when he died, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I had just lost 40 years worth living. Ruth was 85. She lived alone in a small apartment at the end of a nursing home hallway in Texas. Her room was simple: a rocking chair, a few faded photographs, and one wooden box locked and tucked high on a shelf. No one was allowed to open it, not until the day she decided to tell her story. "He betrayed me," Ruth began when the nurse gently asked about the box. "We fell in love at 18, married at 22, had our first child when I was 24. Then one day, I found out he was seeing someone else, younger, prettier, and he left on our 15th wedding anniversary." The room went silent. No one interrupted. Only the soft rustle of the wind through the curtains filled the space. "I swore I'd never forgive him," Ruth said. "I raised the kids alone, worked twice as hard, 3 times. And in every paycheck, every parent-teacher meeting, every quiet dinner, I kept that anger alive like a flame that helped me keep going." Ruth never remarried, never dated again, never wrote, never called, never asked about him. She fed her anger like a pet, nurtured every memory, every wound, every cruel sentence from the past. Because that pain, it gave her a reason to keep existing. Then at 66, she got a call. He had died of a sudden stroke while visiting his old hometown. No one was with him. No one knew who he had been to anyone. She didn't cry, didn't say a word, just went home, unlocked the wooden box, and inside over 100 unsent letters. She had written them across 30 years. Each time the anger flared. But here's the strange thing. The early letters were filled with blame. The middle ones were full of questions why, and the last few were apologies. Apologies for holding on too long, for becoming a prisoner of her own past, for not forgiving, not for him but for herself. I didn't forgive him, Ruth said, her eyes still fixed on something far away. I forgave for me, so I could live lighter. Because I deserve peace, not a prison built from shattered memories. You know what? Holding on to hurt doesn't make you stronger. It just drains you year by year, month by month, until you don't even recognize your own face beneath the dust of old anger. Letting go isn't losing. Letting go is choosing. Choosing to move forward. Choosing to love yourself more than you hate someone else. If you can do one thing today, write a letter to someone who once hurt you. You don't have to send it, just say it all. Let it pour out, then burn it, tear it up, or keep it as proof that you chose to forgive. You may not be able to change the past, but you can stop the past from shaping the rest of your life. What have you been holding on to for too long? Is there someone you never forgave, and it's been eating at you for years? Share your story in the comments. You might help someone else finally let go and finally start living today. I wish I had spent more time with my family. People always say family is forever, but the truth is, some families don't fall apart because of anger, but because of busy schedules, because of meetings, because of unread emails, because of let's talk tomorrow, because we believe we have a lifetime to make it up to each other. Michael was 73, a once successful businessman in Illinois. He ran a chain of hardware stores with over 500 employees. Big house, nice cars, office lights on late into the night, and his son Alex slept alone every night. Every morning I left before he woke up. Every night I came home after he went to sleep, and on holidays I found ways to squeeze in a business trip or seal a new deal. Michael always believed he was doing it for his family, to give his wife and son a better life, to pay for college without student loans. And yes, Alex got into Harvard, but he never wrote home, never called, never came back for the holidays, not even for his parents' 40th anniversary. It wasn't until Michael turned 68 after a mild heart attack and a routine checkup that he finally started reordering his priorities. And what he realized stunned him. In over 30 years of working, he had taken only 6 full vacations with his family. 6 dinners without checking his phone. 6 Sunday mornings walking with his son, not rushing off to work. 6 times in over 10,000 days living under the same roof. One afternoon in March, Michael picked up the phone and called Alex. Not for advice, not to correct or teach, just to ask, "Did you eat anything good today?" On the other end, there was silence, then a quiet, trembling voice. "I wish I had asked you that a long time ago, too." Time doesn't betray us. It just keeps moving silently, carrying away every delayed hug, every missed birthday, every I love you we meant to say. Family doesn't disappear in an instant. It fades like a photograph left too long in the sun. When Bon met Michael during an end-of-life interview, he smiled softly and said, "I used to think I had time, but no. I just had choices, and I chose work. Now I'm learning to choose family a little late, maybe, but at least I'm still choosing." Bon didn't say a word. He just sat beside him, listening to the silence heavy with memories. Because sometimes a quiet afternoon doesn't need advice. Just someone to sit with you so you don't feel alone in the weight of your own regret. I wish I had stayed in touch with old friends. Frank Turner and Richard Hayes used to be inseparable. Best friends since the 3rd grade. They played soccer after school, saved up together to buy their first rusty bike, shared their first secret cigarette behind the school's storage shed. And when they turned 18, they made a promise. No matter where life takes us, we'll meet up at least once a year. But then life happened. Frank joined the military and moved to Florida. Richard stayed in New Hampshire and became a high school English teacher. They wrote letters the first year, called each other around Thanksgiving, but gradually the calls faded. Not because of anger, just because I'll call when I'm less busy. Frank had 3 kids to raise. Richard was caring for a wife with cancer. Both believed the same thing. True friends can go years without talking and still be fine. Next week, I'll give him a ring. We'll grab coffee someday. They didn't realize that someday would stretch into more than 30 years. One June morning, Frank, now 72, was cleaning out his garage when he stumbled upon an old box of high school photos. He pulled out a dusty picture, him and Richard, arms slung over each other's shoulders, standing in front of the school bus on graduation day. He chuckled, then stopped. A long breath, a quiet pull in his chest, and on a sudden impulse he dialed Richard's old number. The phone rang twice. A woman answered. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "My husband passed away 3 months ago." Frank couldn't speak. He hung up and sat there surrounded by forgotten boxes and tools, whispering to no one. I should have called sooner, just to say I missed him, just to remember the summer of '71 when we laughed so hard we couldn't breathe. Old friends are irreplaceable. They don't just witness your youth, they hold it for you. They carry the version of you that was unguarded, unfiltered, fully alive. Losing them is like losing the mirror that once showed you who you were before life taught you to hide it. When Bond visited Frank at the nursing home, he was gently playing a few soft notes on an old harmonica. No melody, just sound calling back a memory that had drifted too far. Bond asked quietly, "If he were still alive today, what's the first thing you'd say?" Frank smiled a little sadly. "I wouldn't say anything. I'd just hand him a cold beer and sit beside him as we watched the sun go down. Because with old friends, silence is enough." Bond stood, placed a hand on Frank's shoulder, didn't say a word. Because some apologies don't need to be spoken. They just need to be heard by someone still present enough to understand. And that is its own way of keeping what was left unsaid alive in the life that still remains. I wish I hadn't cared so much about what others thought of me. Clara was 88, slender, elegant. Every morning she still pinned her white hair into a neat bun, even though visitors rarely came by anymore. She had once been a music teacher, graceful, composed, respected by her students and neighbors alike. But Clara carried with her a silence that stretched across more than 60 years. A quiet fear, a life lived, not to be happy but to keep others comfortable. When she was 19, Clara fell in love with another girl in her department. The girl had soft eyes, played the violin, and wore fresh flowers tucked behind her ear each morning. Whenever Clara was near her, she felt like she could finally breathe honest light, unafraid to perform the role of a proper young lady. Then one afternoon, as they sat together in the library, their hands brushed beneath the table. A classmate saw it and blurted out, "Oh my God, what is this?" Eyes stared, smirks followed, whispers grew like weeds, and shame washed over Clara like a wave she couldn't fight. That night, she wrote a long letter to the girl full of love and longing and confusion, but she never sent it. She folded it, tucked it into the bottom drawer of her desk, and the next day, she stopped speaking to her. Clara went on to marry a good man, had 2 children, lived the kind of life society applauded. She never cheated, never complained. She simply disappeared inside it. Every time I looked in the mirror, she said I saw a kind woman, but not me. Just the version I thought everyone needed to see. In her later years, Clara began to write again, not for publication, just to record the pieces of herself she had once tucked away. Among her pages were letters from 1954. The ink still bold, though the paper had yellowed with time. Bond read them one afternoon while visiting the library room at Clara's nursing home. Her voice was soft, but her eyes held a strange kind of brightness. "Bond," she said quietly, "if you ask me what I regret most, it's not falling in love with a girl. It's letting the fear of what people might think stop me from ever loving her again." Bond didn't answer. He just sat there and let her go on. I wish someone had told me. I didn't need to live a life that pleased everyone, that being different was still beautiful, that being me was enough. Some lives are built to look peaceful from the outside, but beneath the quiet rooftops lie dreams that were folded away just because we were afraid of what people would say if we dared to dream differently. Freedom doesn't mean shouting, "I don't care," to the world. It means standing in front of the mirror and whispering, "This is me, and I am enough." When Bon left Clara's room that afternoon, she handed him a small notebook. On the first page, in handwriting from her 80th year, she had written, "Don't wait until your hair turns white to live your truth. Some things, if not lived today, may never have the chance to be lived at all. I wish I had laughed more." Henry was 70, the kind of man so serious his friends nicknamed him the chairman who never smiled. He spent his life building a company, tracking every number, analyzing every strategy, calculating every risk. And in every single family photo, Henry was always the one not smiling. "When I was younger," he said, "I thought laughter was weakness, a loss of control, a little ridiculous." But when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer and spent nearly a year in the hospital, the one thing he realized he'd truly missed in life wasn't a deal left unsigned. It was the laughter at family dinners, the wild giggles while watching cartoons with his kids, the shy little laugh his wife gave on their wedding day. Henry told Bon this while they sat in the back garden of the nursing home. Sunlight filtering through the leaves, a quiet breeze between them. "I lived too seriously," Henry admitted, "so much so that when there was a real reason to laugh, I held back, afraid I'd ruin my image." But that image, what was it worth if no one remembers me being happy with them? Bon chuckled. And Henry did something rare. He laughed too, for the first time in a long time. A full, honest laugh, like a child who'd just been forgiven. "I wish I hadn't worked so much." Carol was 68, a former head nurse at a major hospital in Philadelphia. She worked 38 years straight without ever taking more than 2 days off at a time. Her husband died when she was 42. And instead of stopping to grieve, she dove into work night shifts, morning shifts, back-to-back doubles. Her son Jared grew up with a fridge full of food but no mother at the dinner table. He never asked much, she told Bon. Just once. He wrote something in my birthday card, "I miss you more than you miss me." She still keeps that card all these years later. Bon once visited Carol on the day she retired. She was sitting quietly outside her small apartment, flipping through old wall calendars. Every page had red marks on it, but they were all hospital shifts. No vacation days, no second wedding, no picnic dates with her son. "I used to think working hard meant living well," she said. "Now I know. Sometimes living well means knowing when to stop." I wish I had forgiven my parents. Jason was 75, and he never called his father Dad. In his memory, the man was always drunk, always yelling, never not once held him close. Jason grew up making a silent vow, "I will never be like him." And he kept that promise. He became a devoted father, a kind, steady husband. He built the kind of family he never had. But somewhere deep inside there was still a locked room. One day, Jason found an old journal. It was his father's, written during the war years. Inside were short, trembling sentences. "I'm afraid my son will hate me forever. But I don't know how to be a father. I was never taught." Jason broke down. Bon sat beside him, quiet, present. And for the first time in 50 years, Jason said the word out loud. "Dad, I wish I had slowed down." Linda was a world-renowned fashion designer. She had traveled to more than 30 countries. Her closet lacked nothing, but her personal life was painfully empty. "I was always in a rush," she said. Rushing to the airport, rushing to answer emails, rushing through life. Then one day she was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. Her hands began to tremble. Her packed calendar unraveled. Her body forced her to slow down. And for the first time, Linda noticed the sunlight spilling through her curtains and didn't rush to close them. For the first time, she brewed a cup of tea and actually waited for the water to boil without checking her phone. Bon sat with her one quiet Friday morning. They sipped tea slowly. She smiled and said, "I used to think slowing down was a waste of time, but now I know. It's the only way time ever truly shows up. I wish I had taken care of my health sooner." Tom was 82, and he used to laugh whenever the doctor told him to quit drinking and start exercising. "I've lived a full life," he'd say. "Now I just want to enjoy it." But enjoyment isn't the same as self-destruction. At 72, Tom had a stroke. It left him partially paralyzed, and he had to learn how to walk again like a child taking his very first steps. The last 10 years of his life became a cycle of physical therapy, strict diets, and a quiet grief every time he watched someone else walk briskly through the park. Bon once pushed Tom's wheelchair on a gentle afternoon stroll. Tom looked ahead, then said something Bon never forgot. "I wish I had known back then." Freedom isn't about eating whatever you want. It's about being able to get out of bed on your own in the morning. I wish I had written down what I learned. Sarah was 79. She had read hundreds of books, taken therapy classes, learned to meditate, learned to paint, learned how to love herself again. But she had never shared any of it. "Every time I discovered something deep," she told Bon, "I thought, it's enough that I know it. But now, I think differently. If wisdom isn't passed on, it doesn't really live." At 77, she began keeping a journal. Bon once read a page she had written. "I don't need to write beautifully. I just need to write honestly. Because if one day someone reads this, maybe they won't have to take the long way around like I did. I wish I had done something wild." Martin was 69, and he had always wanted to learn how to dance tango. But his friends laughed. His wife told him, "People in their 30s still struggle with it. You at 60. So he stopped dreaming, stopped imagining. Then at 68, his wife passed away. The kids had all moved out, and he was left with a quiet apartment and an old radio. One day, Martin walked to the local community center. He knocked on the door of the dance class and bought his very first pair of dance shoes. Bon once watched him practice the same pivot move for nearly 20 minutes. When he asked Martin if he felt embarrassed, Martin smiled. "Not anymore." You know what's worse? Sitting in a chair at 40 dreaming about dancing and never moving. Now I dance, and that means I'm still alive. I wish I had stopped trying to please everyone. Elise was 74, and she always said yes. "Can you watch the grandkids every week?" Yes. "Join the PTA?" Yes. "Cook for the church every Sunday for 12 straight years?" Yes. Even when her body ached, even when all she wanted was rest, she believed if she kept giving, people would keep loving her. But one day she collapsed from exhaustion. No one blamed her, no one even showed up. When Bon visited, she whispered, "I don't blame them. I blame myself for teaching them that I didn't need love, just usefulness. If only I had said no sooner. Maybe I would have had enough strength left to say I love you later. I wish I hadn't waited until I was sick to start living." Walter was 76, and he lived like he had 100 years ahead. Anytime someone mentioned rest, travel, or meditation, he'd wave it off. Later, not now. Then he was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. That's when he started painting, started meditating, started writing letters to an old love to his son, to the version of himself at 30. Bon sat beside him the day he finished his first painting. Walter smiled and said, "I never truly lived until I realized I was dying. I wish I had understood this sooner, that living isn't about counting the healthy years. It's about noticing the ones you're actually present for. You still have time." They didn't. 15 whispers, 15 final truths. No one talked about money. No one regretted not working harder. No one wished they had earned more praise at their funeral. They just wanted one more hug, one more call, one full dinner where no one rushed, one real moment of being alive, even if just for 5 minutes. Bon has listened to hundreds of stories like these. Not to write a book, not to collect tears, but to remind you of one simple thing. You still have time. And if you still have time, live in a way that when your final moment comes, you won't need to whisper anything. If something in this video touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Send it to a friend, a family member, or someone you haven't spoken to in far too long, and follow the life. After 60, the channel that reminds you every single day. Growing old isn't about waiting to die. It's the moment you finally start living for real. When a dream is traded away, not everyone loses a dream because they lack talent. Some lose it simply because they were too kind. Her name was Helen M. Sanders. She was 74. Lived on the second floor of a quiet apartment building where the west-facing window bathed the peeling walls in soft afternoon light, even through the curtains now faded with time. Bond visited her at the request of her granddaughter, who had said, "My grandma's not sick. She just doesn't want to do anything anymore. She just sits and stares at the wall." Helen once had a dream. Not to become someone famous, not for titles, not for money. She just wanted to paint. At 8, she drew with chalk all over the back walls of her house. At 12, she mixed her own pigments from crushed minerals. At 17, she won a statewide art competition. At 20, she was accepted into a prestigious fine arts academy, but she never went. Her father had a stroke. Her mother fell ill, and as the eldest daughter, she stayed. Helen told Bond, "I thought I'd just postpone it, a few years maybe, but then I got married, had kids. My husband asked me to stay home. I said yes. No one forced me. I just always chose the neat, responsible path." She still kept her old sketchbook in a drawer. On the last page, a small cottage with flowering vines and a single sentence faded and smudged. "One day I'll start painting again." One day, that silent promise stretched on for 52 years. Bond asked, "Do you regret it?" Helen didn't answer right away. She looked up at the blank wall across from her chair. "Yes, but I don't regret not pursuing the dream. I regret that I forgot it ever existed." Bond asked, "What made you forget?" She replied, "I got too good at being a wife, too responsible as a mother. I kept thinking when everyone else is okay, then I'll do what I love. But time doesn't wait." Her husband passed. Her children built families of their own. Friends drifted away. And one day she woke up and realized, "I've lived everyone's life except my own." Bond shared with her a Buddhist teaching. Karma is not punishment. Karma is what remains after everything else has faded. Helen wept. Not the sharp, bitter tears of regret, but the quiet kind, like a key unlocking a door. Like dust being gently brushed off a dream. That day, for the first time in more than 5 decades, she picked up a pencil. Her hands trembled. Her eyes blinked through its memory, and the first line appeared. A single leaf, uneven, unsteady, but alive, like a whisper from the past. "I'm still here, as long as you're brave enough to begin again." Helen didn't paint to become an artist, not to display her work, not to prove anything. She painted to become friends with herself again. Bond believes some dreams never die. They just sit quietly waiting for you to remember their name. And when you finally call, they don't scold you. They smile and ask gently, "So, where shall we begin?" You are never too old to do what you once loved, never too late to start again, and never beyond redemption for the piece of your soul you once left behind. If you've spent your life living rightly for everyone else, you've been a good person. But if you dare to live truthfully, even for just one day, you become something else entirely. Free the words I never got to say. There are things we think we'll say someday, but then the years pass and that day never comes. His name was Carl Bennett, 88 years old. He lived alone in a small wooden house just outside the city where the fence was still hand-built from old oak, and the swing in the front yard creaked gently in the evening wind. Carl had been a carpenter, a man who lived with his hands, cutting, joining, shaping, mending. He could fix anything that was broken, anything, except silence. Bond met him on a quiet afternoon. Carl was sitting at his desk writing letters by hand on paper. His quick handwriting trembled, but the lines were steady. Carl smiled. "I'm writing letters to people who are no longer alive to read them." There were 5 envelopes, each yellowed and sealed, each one labeled with a single sentence. "If I could say it now, this is what I'd say." The first letter to his mother. "I'm sorry I didn't cry the day you died. I didn't want anyone to think I was weak. but I screamed your name in my head through the entire funeral. You couldn't hear it. But if you were still here, I'd want you to know every time I hammer a nail, I still whisper your name. The second to his brother who died in the war. I never told you I was proud of you. I only thought it. Only said it to my friends. To you, I just called you stubborn, but now I wish I had called you just once my hero. The third to his ex-wife. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most. I knew how to build houses, but I never learned how to build trust. I think you waited for an apology. I thought we had time, but we never knew how fragile time really is. Carl said, I lived like there was always a tomorrow, but no one told me. Some things, if you don't say them today, you may never get to say at all. Bon didn't speak. Not because he had nothing to say, but because sometimes truth deserves to be heard in silence. The fourth letter. To the son he hadn't spoken to in 12 years. I thought you'd just understand, that you'd feel it, that you'd just know I loved you. But I was wrong. Love isn't meant to be guessed. It's meant to be spoken, every day, every time, and never ever waited on. There are people we've loved with our whole lives, and yet we've never said it out loud. Bon asked, Will you send the letters? Carl shook his head. No, I wrote them, so I wouldn't have to carry them inside anymore. We grow up in a culture that starves the tongue. Love is seen as soft, apology as defeat, gratitude as unnecessary. So we stay quiet. We pretend to understand each other. We pretend we don't need anything. Until one day the person we were saving our words for is gone, and we're left in the middle of an empty room with 1,000 unspoken things and no one left to hear them. Old age doesn't break us because of the body. It breaks us with the weight of everything we've kept inside. Bon once heard a monk say, Death doesn't take away the people we love. It only takes away the chance to finally tell them the truth. Carl placed the letters inside a wooden box, closed the lid, and carved a few words on top. I have loved, I have regretted, but now I have spoken. Bon never forgot that lesson. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you're ready. Don't wait for a holiday, a birthday, or a second chance. If your heart is still beating, that's all the permission you need to say. I'm sorry, thank you, I miss you, I love you. Because we don't know who will still be here tomorrow. But today you have your voice. And maybe that's the most beautiful gift you'll ever give someone. We don't need to be loved to be worthy. Love isn't a reward for perfection. It's the deepest instinct to recognize value even when someone has nothing left to give. Her name was Judith Ann Hale. She was 85, living in a quiet private care home on the outskirts of Boston. Bon was scheduled to visit her at the request of the care manager, who said, She's not clinically depressed, but she's stopped eating, won't speak to anyone, refuses to bathe, she's just fading. When Bon entered the room, Judith was facing the window, her back turned. Her silver hair tangled, her nightgown wrinkled. In her hand was a hairbrush, but she wasn't brushing. Bon didn't speak. He sat. Let silence introduce him first. After a while, she broke it. You know, people only visit me on my birthday. The rest of the year, I'm just an old thing no one uses anymore. Bon said nothing, just waited. I used to be a teacher, she said. I had 2 sons. I once organized Thanksgiving for the whole block. I was the best cook out of 3 sisters. I was the first person people called when they needed comfort. She turned around. Her eyes were deep, like a locked room that hadn't been entered in years. Now, I'm just the old woman who can't remember the night nurse's name. Bon asked gently, Why do you think it feels that way? She didn't hesitate. Because I have nothing left to offer. No strength, no memory, no money, no role. No one needs me anymore. This quiet truth haunts millions of older people. The fear that if they can't give, they no longer matter. Bon told her a story. There was once an elderly man in a meditation class who kept staring at his hands. When someone asked why, he said, These hands once built homes, held my children, held my wife when she cried. Now they just shake and drop teacups. Another man in the group said, But you're still using those hands to hold on to yourself every single day. Worth isn't something we earn, it's something we carry, even when we do nothing at all. Bon looked at Judith and said softly, You don't have to do anything to be loved. Being here is enough. She didn't believe him. She chuckled dryly. But the next day she asked for a bath, then a haircut, then quietly for her old book back, even if she could only read a page or two. Because sometimes all a person needs is to know they're still seen. Not for their usefulness, not for their past, not for their strength, but simply for who they are. Taoism says, don't try to make the water clearer. Let it settle and it will be clear on its own. Buddhism says, even a still life is a flower of awakening in bloom. Christianity teaches, true grace comes not through deeds but through mercy. Judith never went back to being the vibrant woman she once was, but she smiled when someone walked in. She started brushing her hair. She called the nurse by name even when she got it wrong sometimes. Love isn't a prize. It's a reflex of a heart that's learned to see the soul in others even when their surface has worn thin. You don't have to be useful to be loved. You don't need to be sharp, strong, or radiant to be worthy. You just have to be here and trust that you are still an irreplaceable piece of the story being written. The truth isn't painful, it's liberating. You don't have to hide your past to be respected. You just have to be brave enough to step into the light without apologizing for who you are. His name was Gerald William. He was 79, a retired military officer, and for 32 years an assistant pastor at a Baptist church. On the outside, Gerald was the perfect image of a man from his generation, disciplined, faithful, steady, no scandals, no questions asked. But inside, he had lived a life of silence. Bon met him at a 3-day meditation retreat for older adults who had spent their lives in religious service. On the first evening, participants were invited to write a secret and untold truth on a slip of paper and place it anonymously into the truth box. Gerald wrote, "I'm 79 and today is the first time I've ever written this down. I once loved a man 57 years ago." His whole life, Gerald kept that love hidden. As a young man, he had fallen in love with a classmate in college. But he grew up in a conservative community, a place where being different was not forgiven. He didn't want to shame his family, didn't want to destroy his reputation, didn't want to hurt God as people warned him. So he chose silence. He married, raised 2 children, fulfilled every role of a good man, a faithful believer, a model father-in-law. But deep down, he never got to live as himself. On the last day of the retreat, Gerald asked to speak. He stood before 14 others, mostly longtime pastors, nuns, and devout believers, and said, his voice trembling but clear, "I'm not sharing this to gain approval. I'm sharing it because I'm tired of splitting myself in half alive, half hidden." No one left the room, no one interrupted. Then, after a long silence, an 82-year-old woman, a former Catholic school principal, took his hand and said, "There is nothing wrong with living true to your heart. If God is love, then he does not ask his children to live in lies. It's not the truth that breaks us. It's the fear of hiding it that does." Gerald shared that for 57 years, every time he prayed, a small part of him felt guilt, not for loving someone, but for never acknowledging that love was real. Bon asked him, "How do you feel now that it's out?" Gerald looked out the window and smiled. "I feel alive, not surviving, but truly alive. We weren't born to fit into someone else's mold. We were born to be honest with our souls." In Buddhism, truthfulness is among the highest precepts, not to prove morality, but to free us from the suffering that comes from self-denial. In meditation, your heart is a mirror. Cover it with lies and all reflections become distorted. In Taoism, to not fight is strength. To not fear is depth. To not hide is light. Today, Gerald lives alone, but his children still visit. He told them everything. At first they were quiet. Then his daughter said, "Dad, thank you for trusting us. You haven't lost anything in our eyes. You've just become the most honest version of yourself. The truth doesn't cost you love. It only reveals which loves were true enough to stay." Gerald ended his talk that day with this, "I don't need everyone to accept me. I just need to stop rejecting myself." Bon left the retreat feeling as light as the wind. And ever since, in every episode of The Life After 60, Bon reminds his listeners, it's not the truth that hurts you, it's the hiding that wears you down. Only when you live honestly can you be loved authentically. Taoism and the power of not needing. The older we get, the less we need to add. We just need to let go of what weighs down the heart. His name was Wallace Chen. He was 81, a Chinese American living in a small house near the northern forests of Oregon, where the wind never sleeps and the maple leaves fall steadily like the earth breathing in slow rhythm. Wallace was once a wildly successful businessman. He owned 3 restaurants, 2 food import companies, and had even appeared on TV as a rags to riches story. But at 72, he walked away from all of it. Bond visited Wallace one autumn afternoon when the light felt soft as mist and the stone path leading up to the porch was carpeted with gold leaves. Wallace boiled water for tea, placed the pot gently on an old wooden table, and said his first words. "I used to believe the more you have, the safer you are. Now I know the less you carry, the easier it is to breathe." Bond asked, "What made you give up everything right at the peak?" Wallace answered, "I was sitting in my 100 square meter office, looking out through 15th floor glass windows. But inside I felt like I was drowning. One day I went to the hospital for insomnia and heart palpitations. The doctor asked, 'What are you so worried about?' And I said, 'I'm afraid of losing what I've built.' That's when it hit me I wasn't living. I was guarding a prison I called success." In that moment, Wallace made a decision to let go. Not because he was weak, but because he was too heavy. He sold his companies, paid his employees for a full 12 months, moved to a place where no one knew his name. No TV, no business cards, no goals. Just himself, an old zither, and a vegetable garden. Bond asked, "Was it hard going from having everything to needing nothing?" Wallace smiled gently. "No. It wasn't hard, but it was quiet. So quiet in the beginning I thought I had died, but then I started to hear my own footsteps again. The sound of boiling water, the wind brushing through the cracks in my door, and I thought, maybe this is actually living. The young seek achievement, the old seek peace, but only those who've let go enough can ever touch true stillness." Wallace lives by a Taoist principle his father passed down. Not competing is strength, not showing off is depth, not being full is the key to receiving. Bond remembers one visit an old friend had come to see Wallace and asked, "Don't you feel like this is a waste of your talent?" Wallace poured him tea and replied, "Maybe, but I used to live to prove something. Now I live to feel light. I no longer need to be remembered, I just need to remember who I am." We often think we must do something big to be valuable, but Wallace taught Bond something else. The greatness of a life sometimes lies in the decision to do nothing at all, to simply sit there like a small stone, not moving, not forcing, yet still making others pause. True strength doesn't lie in accumulation. It lies in the shedding until no one can control you anymore through the fear of loss. Bond left Wallace's house as the last sunlight faded. His heart felt light as mist, his hands still warm from the tea he hadn't finished. And he understood. In old age, you don't need more. You just need to release what you no longer need to carry. You don't need to win. You don't need to prove. You don't need to be remembered. You only need to be here, light and enough. Making peace with yourself. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to stop punishing yourself for something you can no longer change. Her name was Rosalind Evans. She was 86. She had served as a military nurse, then spent nearly 20 years working at a maternity clinic. No one would have guessed that the woman who once held hundreds of newborns in her arms had been carrying the greatest regret of her life, leaving her own child behind. Bond met her during a special group session for older adults carrying unresolved guilt. She sat in the corner of the room, silent for the first 2 days. Then on day 3, without warning, she spoke. "I left my baby at the hospital when I was 19. The room went still. I didn't look at him. I just signed the papers and ran." Bond didn't ask anything. No one did. She continued as if at last she had reached the moment her heart had held in slings for nearly 70 years. "I always told people I never had children. Then I became a nurse. I held other people's babies, took care of them like I was trying to make up for something. But I never let myself hold my own. I've punished myself my entire life." She told the group that every time she heard a baby cry, whether on TV on the street or in the operating room, she felt as if her child was calling her from a distance. And in her dreams, she often saw a child standing silently at the foot of her bed, never crying, just watching her quietly. Bon asked, "Have you ever forgiven yourself?" She shook her head. "I don't think I deserve it." That was one of the most heartbreaking things Bon had ever heard from someone at the end of life. "I don't deserve to be forgiven by myself." But on the final day of the retreat, there was a writing exercise. Write a letter from your present self to your younger self. Rosalind wrote, "To me, age 19, trembling in the hallway of the hospital. I know you're scared. I know you think you've done something wrong, but you had no one to protect you, no one to hold your hand. And if I, the woman you would become, could sit beside you now, I wouldn't punish you anymore. You weren't bad, you were just alone. And I, your future self, would hold you gently and say, 'You survived, you tried, you are enough.'" She folded the letter, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, "For the first time, I don't feel like I'm guilty anymore." We often think forgiveness is something others must give us, but the deepest, hardest kind of forgiveness is the one we give ourselves. In Buddhism, there is no enemy more dangerous than the part of you that resents yourself. In Christianity, love your neighbor as yourself. But if we don't know how to love ourselves, how can we truly love anyone else? Rosalind doesn't know where her child is today, but she said, "If he can hear me, I just want to say I'm sorry. I still love you. And now, I've learned how to love myself because of you." Bon watched her walk out of the room that day. Her frame was small, but her back was straight, her hands trembling but firmly holding the letter. The sunlight streamed through the hallway windows, casting her shadow long behind her like a young woman finally returning from a memory frozen in time. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is looking your wound in the eye and saying, "I'm not afraid of you anymore, and I no longer hate myself." Coming home. Not everyone has a place to return to, but everyone has somewhere they can pause and call it peace. His name was Elias Boone. He was 91, an elderly man living with early-stage dementia, residing in a care home with trees, soft grass, and a small pond where the morning mist clung to the tips of leaves like pearls waiting to fall. Bon visited after hearing the nurses say, "He doesn't remember anyone's name, not the day, month, or year, but every morning he sings. A song no one knew, no lyrics, just broken melodies drifting softly like a lullaby. And every time he sang, he smiled, as if he had just returned to somewhere very, very familiar." Bon sat with him one morning. The sky was clear, the air cool like the breath of the world waking up. Elias didn't ask who Bon was. He simply patted the seat next to him, inviting him to sit. Then he sang, slow, wavering, but full of feeling. It wasn't music. It was memory speaking in the fragmented language of the soul. Bon asked softly, "Where did you learn that song?" Elias frowned slightly, then smiled and pointed to his chest. "From here. When memory leaves us, what remains? Not degrees, not fame, not bank statements, but a song, a feeling, a wordless memory that still makes you smile." Bon recalled a saying from Zen, "The things you cling to most tightly are the first to fall away. But what you never tried to hold, those are what stay with you to the end." Elias no longer remembered his wife's name, but each morning he would sit by the pond, drop tiny flowers into the water and say, "She always loved water," said we met in the middle of a rainy afternoon. Some who watched may have thought he was confused, but Bon knew he was coming home. Not to a house of bricks, not to a mailing address, but to a place inside himself where he didn't have to remember anything, to simply be. Bon asked him one final question. "If you could remember just one thing, what would it be?" Elias looked up. His forehead creased with time, but his eyes were bright like clear water. He said, "I want to remember how not to be afraid. Not afraid to forget, not afraid to lose, not afraid to let go. Because in the end, home isn't where you never leave. It's where you can pause, sit down, and say to yourself, 'I'm back.' In Buddhism, when the heart returns, that is when it finally rests. In Taoism, heaven and earth speak no words, but returning to nature is returning to the way. In Christianity, the prodigal son was never turned away. He only had to come back and was embraced. Elias didn't need reminders, didn't need corrections, didn't need to be the elderly man worth remembering. He just needed to sit, sing his song, and know he wasn't forgotten by his own heart. In old age, peace doesn't live in memory. It lives in acceptance that we don't need to remember to still be human. We don't need to be brilliant to still be alive. We don't need to do anything to finally come home. You're not broken. You're just coming home. Everything you've hidden, feared, or regretted didn't make you less worthy. They've simply been guiding you back to where you've always belonged yourself. If you've stayed with us until this chapter, then maybe you too are on your way home. Not to a house, not to a city, not to another person, but to the truest version of you. You've carried the weight of being strong for too long. You've hidden your pain, your memories, your mistakes. You believed that only when you were perfect, worthy, and right would you deserve love. But now, you know better. Love isn't something we earn. It's something we open ourselves to receive. And to receive it, you only have to be real. You don't need to be whole. You don't need to be young. You don't need to be understood by everyone. You don't need praise titles or approval. You just need to pause, breathe, and whisper to yourself, I'm still here, and I am enough. You are enough, even with silver hair, trembling hands, fading memory, a life full of crossed-out lines. If someone left you, it wasn't because you weren't good enough. It was because they hadn't yet learned to see the light that shines through the cracks. If someone once called you too much, too slow, too complicated, that wasn't the truth. That was just their lens not being soft enough to see the quiet beauty in you. Bon has sat beside many people in their final days, and they never mentioned titles, or money, or the best photo ever taken of them. They only remember a hug. They never gave a name. They never spoke an afternoon. They should have stayed just a little longer. A version of themselves they never fully lived. You don't need to become the ideal version of yourself. You just need to become the honest one. As long as you're still breathing, you still have time. Time to forgive. Time to rewrite. Time to hold yourself gently and say, I'm not running anymore. In Buddhism, there's a quiet state called nirvana in daily life, not found on mountaintops, not dependent on full enlightenment. Just sitting with yourself and realizing, I was never wrong, I was only scared. In Christianity, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poor not in money, but in expectations, in heavy roles, in armor, like a child who knows they're loved without needing to earn it. In Taoism, live like water, don't force, don't fight, don't cling, don't rush, and eventually, you'll find your way home, and you will too. You are returning to the light inside you, to your shaking hands still full of kindness, to a life that doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. You are not broken. You've never been broken. You are simply becoming yourself for the very first time without the mask. And in that journey, you are more beautiful than you've ever been. If you're still listening, know this. You are not alone. You are not meaningless. You have not been forgotten. You are simply in the final stretch, the most sacred part where truth no longer hurts but heals, where your inner light no longer hides, where your presence, whether seen or not, is still a miracle. And if there's one thing you remember from everything we've shared, let it be this final blessing. You are not shattered. You never were. You are becoming softer, truer, more whole through everything you thought had broken you. If this touched your heart, if you saw yourself in these stories, if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. Leave a heartfelt comment, and don't forget, tap follow on the Life After 60, where every day we keep returning, keep healing, and keep living together.